What is up, party people? We are back with another video, and today we're going to look at conservation biology. Feel free to pause for our objectives, and we're going to get right into it. So what is conservation biology? Well, it is a multidisciplinary approach of science to protecting, managing, and restoring biodiversity, particularly from those arising from human activity. So biodiversity, as we've mentioned in previous videos, is the total number of the kinds of species and their relative abundance in a given area. So we can look at genetic, which is the genetic variety of a population, which impacts species resilience, because if you have a lot of species that are genetically similar, if something happens that impacts that, you're going to wipe out majority of those organisms. Whereas if you have different genetics, then some are going to be less susceptible to whatever that disturbance is. Next is chemical. This is the variety of chemical products and byproducts produced in the cells of different species directly related to the genetic diversity. And then our ecosystem. Again, this is the variety of ecosystems found all around the globe. Ecosystem characteristics also directly impact their biodiversity. So biodiversity is impacted by numerous internal and external forces. Geography is a huge one. It contributes to the physical appearance that can impact which species can actually reside in that particular area. Latitude, for instance, the further away from the equator, the lower the biodiversity actually is. And this is because lower latitude biomes and ecosystems have more ecological niches, which allows for greater speciation. And then time as well. Species change over time, evolution, and the geology will change as well over time, which will change the physical environment. Also looking at biodiversity, we'll have mass extinction. This is a sudden, large-scale loss of biodiversity, or the disappearance of an entire species. Extinct means that they are no longer living. The members of the species, there are none left. Extant are the currently living members of a species. There are 5 recognized previous mass extinction events. So we have the Ordovician to the Silurian, which was a very long time ago, the late Devonian, also very long time ago, the Permian to the Triassic period, Triassic to the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous to the Paleogene, which again, all of these were a very long time ago, but these are all the periods of essentially dinosaurs that we would consider them in today's world. And the causes for these mass extinctions are a mix of geological climate changes and direct causes, but they're uncertain. We have an idea of what happened, but again, they were so long ago, it's difficult to fully tell. If you are interested in dinosaurs, I highly recommend a documentary that is on Netflix, and it's all about dinosaurs, and it covers all of these periods as well as the extinctions of them. Moving on, the endemic species. These are species found in only one geographic location, so they have a way higher potential for extinction events. And it also reflects the uniqueness of that specific ecosystem. So again, an example of this would be the Galapagos tortoise. It is only found on one island in the entire world, and that is one island within the Galapagos Islands. And that's because it cannot swim, and there is no physical way for it to get to another island to reproduce or spread its species. So it's only found on that one island. And then biodiversity hotspots are geographical areas with a high level of endemic species, but that also means that there's a high risk for significant species loss and potential mass extinctions. And then these are also focus areas for biological conservation. So an example would be the Amazon rainforest, being that one, tropical rainforests have the highest level of biodiversity, but they also, being a rainforest, have a lot of trees that will grow quickly. And so logging is very predominant in those areas. So there are a lot of efforts to try and limit logging and the destruction of those habitats. So again, 6 mass extinctions. We have the Paleocene mass extinction. This was due to human activity. It began in around the 1500s when human populations began to expand outwards. An example would be the dodo birds. It's very sad for the dodo birds. And extinction rates. So it's difficult to really quantify since many species are known to go extinct without knowledge, and there are actually a lot of species that are deemed extinct, yet there have been members of that species found later on. An example would be Extinct or Alive. It's a TV show on Animal Planet where Forrest Galante will go and search for these supposedly extinct animals, and the Galapagos tortoise was thought to be extinct, and he discovered a live one on the Galapagos Islands. Therefore, it's not extinct. Many other species like the yellow river caiman, fish species, all various kinds, but again, this is because they go extinct without knowledge, and species are also unknown or rare, so it might be hard to find them. And in areas with high biodiversity, like a rainforest, it's going to be really difficult to try and hunt down a species, therefore people might think that it's gone. And then background extinctions. The natural rate of extinction is approximately 1 per million species per year, which is really, I mean, when we think about human impact and the fact that humans are responsible for numerous extinctions, polar bears are in danger, pandas were in danger, dodo birds went extinct because of humans. The Tasmanian tiger is supposedly extinct because humans killed it off, as well as the Zanzibar leopard. all of those very amazing species were killed off because of human impact. So biodiversity, it's very important to human life in many ways. Health, one, many plants are used for medicine going back thousands of years, and many plants produce the compounds which are beneficial to human health, and many are used in modern pharmaceuticals. Secondary plant compounds are toxic to insects and other animals that may eat the plants, but they are functional for humans as medicines. And as we know, medicine is very important to keep humans alive. Agriculturally, there's diverse food sources that provide numerous of vital nutrients, and high diversity is also a protection against sudden crop loss due to a disease or other factor. And then wildlife, high diversity increases overall ecosystem health, which increases the diversity available for humans to use, like the examples listed above. And then threats and issues, there are many threats. The primary one being habitat loss. So this is the reduction of the natural environment necessary for species survival. So clearing forests for farming or ranching lands and building homes, pollution that leads to toxins in the environment, or natural disasters. Overharvesting is a big one, which is harvesting of natural resources beyond the capability of recovery. So many fish species have been hunted or harvested near extinction, and so they are beyond the capability of recovering, essentially, because either they don't reproduce quickly enough to replenish that, or humans have just done it to the point where it's just not possible. And then exotic species, this is a big one. These are non-native species that are introduced to a new ecosystem, and there's little to no ecological pressures, which then often leads to them outcompeting the native species. We also consider them invasive species, which will cause the elimination of the native species there because competition of resources, they're outcompeted. An example of this would be Florida, the Everglades, pythons. There are so many invasive species in Florida that have been introduced through the pet trade, for example, and that's leading to the natural native species being outcompeted and dying off. Climate change is also a huge one. It's the altering of weather patterns like average temperature that results from changing in climates, and it's due largely to the rising levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide. The climate, as we know, is very important to biomes and the organisms that live in those biomes, but climate is the long-term atmospheric conditions for a specific area. It's predictable. Weather is the short-term atmospheric conditions for a specific area, which is only predictable really over a couple of days. That's why your Apple Weather app only shows you about a week at a time, and even then it's not fully accurate. And then global climate change is the climate changing on a global scale. And this is mostly the focus of climate change in science and for political policies. An example of this would be climate change melting glaciers in the Arctic and leading to habitat destruction for polar bears, for example. Coral bleaching, another huge one. Loss of a coral reef's characteristic coloring. So this is from pollution and other human activities that impact coral bleaching. It results in a loss of biodiversity from the warming waters, which then cause a loss of symbiotic food-producing algae. Eutrophication is also excessive microorganism growth, which results from nutrient runoff, which causes oxygen depletion and the death of organisms because they need oxygen. An example of this would be an algal bloom. This is where there's a large accumulation of algae, which results from exponential growth, and it's fueled by the nitrogen and phosphorus runoff from pollution and fertilizers. And it prevents vegetation from growing in the water, and it blocks that sunlight from getting in, and it also releases toxins. And so animals will die because they don't have oxygen, and the algae will then die off and it will be decomposed. Dead zones. These are areas within aquatic ecosystems that are depleted of their natural living organisms. It's a result of pollution, eutrophication, oil spills, toxic runoff, dumping. Again, very sad, all the organisms are gone. Fallout, this is where sulfur that falls out of the atmosphere to the Earth's surface. And then we also have acid rain. These are rain phases that pass through the atmospheric sulfur, resulting in sulfuric dioxide or weak acid, and it will increase erosion and completely lower the pH of waterways. Biomagnification. This is the increasing of the concentration of specific substances, usually toxins, at each trophic level, and it cannot be metabolized, so they are passed on from organism to organism as they move up trophic levels. An example would be DDT, which was a pesticide used in the 60s and 70s. Fish ate organisms that were covered in this pesticide, and birds ate those fish. Over time, bioaccumulation, which is the gradual buildup of the concentration of toxins in an individual, it built up to the point where it was impacting the bird's reproduction to the point where they were laying very fragile shelled eggs. And because of that, the eggs would not last because their shells were so fragile that they would break. And this significantly decreased the population for the birds because they weren't able to reproduce and replenish the numbers that they were losing from those that were naturally dying off. And then again, while natural processes impact biodiversity, human activity has been the largest impact by far. Pollution, dumping, runoff, exhaust, overharvesting, food production, hunting, land clearing, habitat loss, physical damage to reefs and aquatic animals through motors, exotic species, GMOs. All of these are really negatively impacting our ecosystems and our environments. I will say, despite humankind's negative influences, humans are also responsible for conserving and preventing and trying to recover these damaged ecosystems that are even not caused by humans, like after natural disasters. And this has led to an improved understanding of biodiversity, which then leads to better approaches and technologies like DNA barcoding, which is the use of short sequences of DNA for comparison, like rapid identification. Or red lists. These are lists of extinct and endangered species that are maintained by the International Union of Conservation of Nature. So these are threatened, endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, critically endangered, all of these different categories that we can look at and then know that we need to protect and do more. And speaking of doing more, legislation is a huge way we do that. Laws and regulations that will restrict or govern various activities for the prevention of biodiversity loss and or recovery. So one is the Endangered Species Act of 1973, which required the United States Fish and Wildlife Service to enact programs that will bring back listed species for substantial levels or sustainable levels. Next is going to be the Clean Water Act of 1972, and this was where the regulation of water pollutants and aquatic habitats were attempting to be restored. So in this case, exotic species, the number of an individual legislations have been passed to regulate the import and export of these exotic species to try and limit the invasiveness of them. And then many local ordinances have also passed laws and ordinances to supplement these larger legislations or establish their own guidelines that are unique to their areas because they have a better idea of the biodiversity where they live. And then again, with conservation, education is huge. You know, we need to take efforts, and efforts have been made to improve the general knowledge of the public through various educational approaches like courses and formal education that will address the issues and effects, parks, national and local zoos, other nature-based programs, and then as well as informal approaches to educate the population like an advertisement, TV, magazine, or radio ad. Nature conservation, it's the designation or purchasing of large areas of land to protect it from future destruction. So these are examples like wildlife preserves, areas that are designated for the protection through legislation. It may also include a land purchase. Buffer zones are a safe zone between the official preserve area and a non-protected land, which helps increase that wildlife preservation effectiveness. And then wildlife corridors. These are smaller preserves that connect larger areas so that individuals can actually travel safely from the larger preserves. And this helps aid in maintaining that larger gene pool. And then habitat restoration. Again, we talked about this a little bit, but it's the careful management and introduction of native species to a damaged ecosystem. So examples would be keystone species being reintroduced to help restore the natural balance of the impacted ecosystem, like the Yellowstone wolves or a dam removal. Dams can dramatically change upstream and downstream ecosystems. So when you remove them, the hope is that they are able to come back. And then captive breeding is another huge one. It's the breeding of species that are near extinction to help aid in their recovery so that they will be bred in captivity and then eventually, hopefully, released back into the environment. An example of this would be blue macaws. They were significantly at risk of becoming extinct, but thanks to quite a few private practices at zoos, they are trying to recover that population. And these birds have actually been released back into the environment while some are still in captivity being reproduced to help maintain that population. Another example would be giant pandas. They were downgraded from endangered to vulnerable, which is amazing, meaning that their numbers are coming back up in 2026. And again, that was because of captive breeding and release programs. So I really hope that you learned something from this video. If anything, I hope you will think twice next time you are in nature or thinking about littering on the side of the road. Feel free to drop any comments or questions below in the comments section, and feel free to watch all the other videos today.